Why does Higuruma matter? With the upcoming adaptation of the Culling Game arc in January of 2026, tons of JJK fans, including myself, are extremely excited to see many hype characters by the likes of Kashimo, Hakari, Yuki, and most importantly for the sake of this video, Higuruma. Higuruma's first introduction into Jujutsu Kaisen was a tease at the end of chapter 143, but his formal introduction into the story took place in chapters 158 and 159, and he very quickly made an impression on general audiences. I mean, bro was literally soaking in that tub for God knows how long, just harvesting aura, waiting on the main character to walk in. This is quite literally some shit Tommy Shelby would do on the regular. Just basking in depression. I love it. Peaky Blinders, great show by the way. Give that a watch. Higuruma has quite a few themes and some core ideas that people generally don't give Gege enough credit for when discussing his character, so that is what I would like to focus on today. Before we get too deep in this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. We are on our way to 20,000 subscribers, and I was sure to have you around. This will also be an ongoing series, Why Blank Character Matters, or Why Characters Matter. I want to just give a shine on characters that I feel are underrepresented in certain series, so I feel like this would be a good avenue to take it, and I might have some guest stars, maybe even on this video. I don't know, we'll see. Background and motivation. Hiromi Higuruma was a very esteemed defense attorney in the Japanese legal circuit. He was hailed as a genius in law school, as well as his peers, especially in the Iwate Bar Association. For reference, the reason that the Iwate Bar Association matters in this discussion is that even in this smaller prefecture, Higuruma's skills and dedication stood out, and he earned much respect at an early age. Essentially, Higuruma was so good that he was singled out in his regional law school for his own genius. Not the Harvard-level prestige of a school, but still proof of a standout talent. Higuruma was known to take on many cases that were difficult and deemed lost causes in the eyes of many. His own protege grows frustrated with him due to this, but Higuruma is shown to be driven by empathy for the wrongly accused, regardless of his own reputation. Higuruma states, "Ever since I was a kid, I couldn't leave things alone if something wasn't right, and that hasn't changed. Lady Justice wears a blindfold to represent the law's impartiality, and people close their eyes to spare themselves the truth. But even so, in order not to deny the hands that reach out for my help, even if I'm the only one, I want to keep my eyes open." So just from this, we can glean that Higuruma originally believed in the goodness of people. At this point, he is an embodiment of the phrase, innocent until proven guilty. Now, this is a very valiant trait, and while some may call it naive in a world full of pessimism, it is respectable at the very least. But then we come to a case that Higuruma seemingly couldn't tackle. Higuruma takes on the case of a man named Kita. He is accused of the violent murder of a mother and daughter in their home within Morioka City. Kita had fled during questioning when approached by patrol officers, and within his home, they found a bloody kitchen knife. Seemingly, he was caught red-handed. I mean, why else would you run from the police while having a bloody kitchen knife within your home? Blood analysis from the forensic team later proved that the blood on the knife matched the victim's, so to any normal person, this is an open and shut case. But Kita insists that he was innocent. Kita states that he ran from the police for two reasons. He says that he ran because, one, he has a cat, and if he was arrested and sent to jail, his cat would have died. It would have starved to death. Cats are not allowed at the shelter that he was staying at, so nobody would have known that there was a cat that needed taken care of. Two, the police had once illegally questioned him because he had a friend who was using drugs, so he presumably ran due to his previous negative encounters with law enforcement. He says that he planned to give the bloody knife to the police later, which to any normal person seems preposterous, but once again, Higuruma looks into his past, and it begins to seem more likely that it might have been the case. Kita worked at a non-profit caring for individual living for the elderly. He was never paid an actual wage, but rather boxed lunches, groceries, and small bonuses, the equivalent of pocket change on New Year's. And regardless, he was forced to pay 50,000 yen a month for rent, which is equivalent to $336 in USD. So strictly from this, we can assume that Kita is a good person. While yes, he may have still carried out the murder, as we see cases of elder abuse is still rampant in supposedly trusted facilities in the real world, it does make us more inclined to believe he has a strong sense of selflessness. Higuruma continues to say that there are numerous residents at this non-for-profit with criminal records. Kita says that according to facility rules, calling the police or ambulances will quote-unquote bother the neighbors, which is incredibly suspicious, and the rise of shady non-for-profits is growing annually, so it's possible that this facility is one of them. At the initial trial, the court found Kita innocent. Shortly after the crime, one of the facility's residents went missing. Nothing was stolen. Nothing stolen was found in Kita's room, and at the estimated time of the crime, Kita was shown on camera at a convenience store security footage. So, it looked like we were up, chat. The W's were inbound, and it looked like Kita was going home. Kita thanks Higuruma tearfully for believing him and not discarding him, regardless of all that was against him. But, unfortunately, that's not what happened. In the appeal hearing, otherwise known as the second trial, Kita was found guilty. His punishment, life in prison. But how on earth could this have happened? Well, as Higuruma explains it, independent defense lawyers like himself work on limited funding and small staffs, while public prosecution have taxpayer dollars and extensive manpower to throw towards cases. This is just how the system works. But this goes further than that. The public prosecutors failed to provide any new evidence during the second trial, but the court passed a sentence based on the flimsy argument that there was no reason to suspect the missing person, so the previous ruling was overruled. The highest court refused to hear most cases, so a third trial was dead in the water. In Higuruma's own words, the system had branded him guilty from the very start. The look of contempt that Kita gives Higuruma is nothing short of bone-chilling. Given the insurmountable evidence against the prosecution's case to convict Kita and the average person's common sense, it wasn't enough. In this moment of rage and despair, Higuruma awakened his curse technique. This is the case that broke Higuruma, and he slaughtered the entire prosecution and judge in cold blood. At this moment, this was the inception of Hiromi Higuruma, the sorcerer, a man who once believed in justice, who has now turned the very courtroom once weaponized against the innocent into his own weapon of judgment, where he alone decides guilt and punishment. Role in the Culling Games. Now, in the Culling Games, Higuruma is not necessarily a villain, but more of a tragic figure trying to find meaning again. Higuruma is one of the leading players within the Culling Games, and he had already gathered 100 points by the time Yuji found him. Jujutsu Tech was trying to add rules to save their friends and family stuck within the Culling Game, so when Yuji finds Higuruma, he finds him soaking in a bathtub, full Margiela suit and all. Higuruma says that he's just trying things he's never tried before. Yuji asks Higuruma for his points and explains why Jujutsu Tech would like to save as many civilian lives as possible, and Higuruma responds with a short and succinct no. Higuruma states that if the power he received is real, then the rules of the Culling Game must be real and cemented. Quote, "The Culling Game presents possibilities. If the power I have received is real, then so are the rules. But what about the Culling Game rules? Sometimes the law is powerless. I recognize the rules aren't perfect, but I want to preserve the Culling Game's basic mechanics, so I don't want it to end too soon. Wouldn't that be wonderful? What if rule breakers got punished according to natural law without any charges, prosecutions, or trials?" Yuji says that he doesn't really get what Higuruma is saying and says that the whole country is at risk of dying if the Culling Games keeps up, and Higuruma states, "I doubt it. The Culling Games represent permanence," and thus Yuji and Higuruma begin their duel for point acquisition. So we are fully caught up with just who Higuruma is at this point, but the key point here is that Higuruma is not simply another obstacle or curse in Yuji's path. Higuruma here is a shell of himself, and I certainly feel that there are some themes Gege wanted to convey with his character that people tend to gloss over. Let's take a look. Systematic failure. Higuruma doesn't necessarily see himself as the change necessary for a systematic overhaul, but rather just a cog in the machine, not too far removed from the young man he ends up fighting for his point acquisition. Why does Higuruma seemingly lose his mind after he loses the trial? Well, his foundation was shattered under him for the last time. Everyone in that courtroom said the young man was innocent, but it didn't matter. The odds were stacked against him from the very start, so at that point, why even bother? This was Higuruma's boiling point. He refers to Lady Justice's eyes being blind to represent impartiality, but he wants to keep his eyes open because he can't ignore those who need help. Yes, this intrinsically is a good trait to have, but what happens when your ideal that you hold close to your heart is spat on, dragged through the mud in front of your face on a daily basis? It would be logical for anyone to snap. And it makes sense why Higuruma is this weird shell of a person when Yuji finds him. He's searching for some sort of meaning. Everything that he has known up until this point has just been proven false and false and false. And he's tried to hold out hope and tries to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but he just could not take it anymore. So he tries things that he's never tried before. He soaks in a bathtub with his clothes on. He tries to be the money-grubbing lawyer for a second. He's in this sea of depression that he cannot pull himself out of just because of the circumstances that have happened to him. He's played the good guy for so long, he ends up becoming this depraved shell. You either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Yeah, you know what I'm saying here. Justice versus vengeance. Higuruma, before he was taken, represented true justice. He embodied the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Faith that fairness and truth could prevail. But with Kita's conviction, it showed that this isn't a guarantee. When Higuruma awoke and slaughtered the prosecution and judge, he no longer represented this ideal. At this moment, it was vengeance. He was hurt and he wanted payback for these victims of the system, but that wasn't it exactly. It was for him. So when the Culling Games gave him an avenue to work through his anger exactly how he wanted it, the courtroom that was once supposed to represent impartiality now became his own execution chamber. So where does Yuji fit into this? Well, Yuji is the counterweight to this ideal. Yuji accepts all the guilt and pain, but most importantly, responsibility, even when the system is stacked against him. These larger forces at play, Sukuna or even the court system, had two extremely different effects on these individuals. Higuruma unknowingly fled into his own madness and anger, and while yes, in Shibuya Yuji was at his lowest, he is uplifted by those around him, acknowledges that I won't run away anymore. Whatever cards he is dealt, he has to make the best of it. It's not about fairness with Yuji, but rather perseverance through adversity. When Higuruma is shaken by Yuji's confession to the Shibuya massacre, it's because Yuji didn't run from his punishment or blame anybody else, and it wasn't something Higuruma had ever seen before to that degree. Higuruma unknowingly became the very system that he hated. The proof he had, he knew that Yuji did not commit this crime, but Yuji fought for the opposite because that was his own personal truth. Yuji achieved his own personal sense of justice through self-responsibility, while Higuruma exacted his vengeance by externalizing blame onto the system. So the question that I believe Gege poses to the viewer is twofold. What is true justice without fairness? And when the system fails, is vengeance the only path left? I believe this is the core of why Higuruma matters. He represents this mortal conflict, but we see a different side of Higuruma in the Shinjuku Showdown arc and moving on. For this portion of the video, I wanted to grab somebody that was just as obsessed with Gege's work as I am, and someone who is extremely intimate with Higuruma as a character already. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the channel, Alonz.
Thanks to Daffy's great analysis of Higuruma in the Culling Games, I can now freely talk about the progression of his character across his admittedly very short time in the Shinjuku Showdown arc. Okay, sure, we all know that he's a very well-written character with lots of cool themes, but before I get into that side of things, I first wanted to just glaze his actual ability as a sorcerer, because for some reason in the Big 25, we're still underrating Higuruma. Yuta Okotsu and Hiromi Higuruma are referred to as Jujutsu prodigies on par with Satoru Gojo in terms of raw talent. Yes, I'm somehow finding a way to glaze Yuta, get over it. What I love about this fact is that it doesn't even need to be said. Like, we can literally see it when watching Jujutsu High's reaction to Gojo versus Sukuna, which is something I really appreciate from Gege. It's the finer details like these that make him a really neat author in my opinion, because there's lots of, show and tell kind of mixed together in a nice balance. Pretty much every other sorcerer watching this fight was completely lost. I mean, Kusakabe thought he was smart, but half the stuff he said was wrong, and Gojo and Sukuna proved what he was saying to be wrong literally a few chapters after he says it. It was pretty much only Yuta and Higuruma who could actually follow what was happening and figure out the ins and outs of Gojo and Sukuna's strategies while they were using them. When faced with Sukuna, Higuruma's raw talent impresses Sukuna so much that he actually acknowledges that Higuruma's genius is similar to his own right before the narrator then compares him to Gojo himself. That is some crazy glaze, but he definitely earned it because he did literally learn two of the hardest jujutsu techniques in the span of 5 minutes: domain amplification and reverse curse technique. I'm sure you get the point, right? Higuruma is a goated sorcerer who would only climb higher after JJK's ending, and I'm actually kind of sad that we're probably not going to ever see him again. When it comes to his character and themes though, Higuruma is often pretty misunderstood when it comes to his ending. Lots of people don't like that he survived his injuries and thought him living was an arsepull, but I just don't think that's the case. Higuruma was so weighed down by the guilt of what he had done that he couldn't even look Yuji in the eyes and went into that fight fight against Sukuna, literally intending to die on the battlefield while doing the best he could. Constantly throughout that fight, he kept reiterating how he wanted to die in battle, which of course meant he was always going to live because he deserved to. He deserved to live. Sure, he did bad things and he felt bad about it, but he reflected and dedicated himself to righting those wrongs. Higuruma decided that the universe was better off without him, but the universe simply didn't agree. Yeah, that was a nice little Doctor Who quote for you there. If you know, you know. Okay, I don't think I've actually explained that very well though, but look, I'm sure you get the point, right? Like, I do feel like Higuruma living was always in the script. The final point I wanted to make is actually about the similarities between Higuruma's fake-out death and Nanami's death. Higuruma and Nanami were both very similar characters because they were both adults whose job it was to help the youth as best they could before handing the fate of pretty much everything off to those young people. Nanami defeated all those transfigured humans and cleared the way for Yuji to defeat Mahito, and that's when he said, "I'll leave it to you now." Higuruma then confiscated Kamatoke, and at the very least he thought he passed his sword on to Yuji, who could use it to kill Sukuna, even though it wasn't really that simple in the end. The purpose of this parallel between Higuruma and Nanami is to show that both of these adults did everything they could to help Yuji achieve his goals. Helping that new generation is what JJK is all about after all, and I'm sure Gojo was watching that moment from heaven with a big smile on his face. Okay, yeah, that is pretty much all the yap I have to give you about Higuruma, because unfortunately Gege decided we just weren't allowed any more JJK and there really isn't anything else to cover. But I do just have a tiny little confession to make as I end it off. You see, the first time I've read through JJK, I really just didn't feel that much for Higuruma. I wasn't that interested, I didn't think his technique was that good, and obviously I hadn't had much experience reading manga as a whole, so I was very new to anime, I didn't really understand a lot of the themes and stuff. But the more times I've read JJK, I feel like every time I go through Higuruma's stuff, it just gets better and better. I cannot wait to see that guy in the anime, because he is genuinely one of the best things Gege wrote. I don't think it would be crazy to say that. I think Yuji and Higuruma's dynamic, the way his technique works, his fight with Sukuna, even just the action and how it's actually incorporated into a fight, along with the, interesting lore stuff that you can learn about it. Just everything about his character is really interesting. I really like it. I think it's great, and I think I do actually like Higuruma as much as I liked Nanami, to be real. But yeah, thank you guys for actually listening to what I have to say as well. Big up Daffy, goated content creator. Make sure to like and subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you in a bit.
Obviously, huge thanks to Alon's for stopping by on the channel once again. Please be sure to check out his video on Jujutsu Kaisen's most underrated fight, as well as his podcast with Orion and Josh In-Betweener. They're cool guys. Go ahead and drop a like and sub for them. And ladies and gentlemen, that is why I believe Higuruma matters to Jujutsu Kaisen. Let me know down in the comments below what your thoughts on Higuruma and his arc are regarding Jujutsu Kaisen's implementation of him. I'm very curious to see what you guys say. Again, this will be a series moving forward on the channel, so if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, also let me know. But yeah, it's me, boy Daffy, guys. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this video. Please make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Y'all make sure you take care of yourselves, guys, and have a damn good one. Peace.